honored to be here. I'm really pretty nervous, honestly, because I don't usually get nervous to speak in front of people, but I feel a lot of pressure because you guys are Jeff's peers and his customers, so I want to make sure I do a really good job for that too. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in Alney, Texas, on a stocker operation there, and I went to Texas Tech as an accounting major, as I was telling the Birdwells earlier, and I didn't really like that much. I liked accounting, but so I changed majors and I got on the meat judging team, and so that's where I got to this stage. I went to Colorado State, spent a lot of time at that time it was Montfort JBS plant there in Greeley. So much time they thought I worked there. So, and then I went back to Texas Tech. After that I went to USDA in Washington, D.C. I moved there 3 weeks prior to 9/11/2001, so that wasn't, I just wanted to go back to Texas. So I got the opportunity to go back and teach at Angelo State, and then I got the opportunity to go to Oklahoma State, and that's where I met Jeff. So it's been a great move. I've been there for about 12 years. So they asked me to come and just share my thoughts and why I think that producing more beef is critically important, but producing quality beef is even more important. So first, with why we need to produce more pounds. I think we've all heard the statistic, by 2050 the population's going to double. We need to produce more product. We need to produce more pounds of it. And how are we going to do that? We're going to use technology. And we're going to use everything we can from technology standpoint, from genetics to selection to management to feeding. Maybe we'll even use clean meat. So the meat grown in the test tube. I don't know. I don't foresee that. People don't want to eat GMOs. I don't think they're going to eat meat in a test tube. But we'll see. Because we have to feed more people. And we need to be efficient doing it. We need to sustain the industry from an environmental perspective, from a social perspective, and economic perspective. And we can do that by producing more pounds and doing it efficiently, because the overhead costs in the packing industry are the same whether we produce one at 600 or 1,000, virtually the same, not identical, but very close. But as we do that and we increase weight, we have to understand where that give and take is and how we don't want to get too big, and we'll talk about that. And then as we talk about cutability and increasing those pounds, how do we produce more meat but not just more weight? Because waste is a tremendous issue. When we get too much fat, till we get to those yield grade 4s and 5s, where are we going to, that's useless. We've wasted our resources. We've wasted each thing. So those are some things that we'll talk about, and how we increase those red meat yields instead. So why produce cattle with premiums? I think that's very self-explanatory, but a lot of people say, well, ground beef's the #1 beef item in the United States, so just make more pounds and quality doesn't really matter. But because of demand, because of what consumers want, and because of our need in the beef industry to regain market share from pork and poultry, I think we have to produce quality pounds and those cattle that are going to produce premiums. So we're going to talk about that. So with USDA yield grades, 4 simple factors. They were developed in the 1960s. They include weight, fat thickness, ribeye area, kidney, pelvic, and heart fat percentage. So there's been a lot of changes in types of cattle, in management practices, in technology, in feeding. And those yields may be a little different today in how we segregate them into yield grade 1s through 5s and how much percentage cutability, what we're trying to predict, they produce. So should we update them? There's a lot of talk about that in our industry. Do we update yield grades? Do we change what we're doing? Well, we know that we don't get paid a lot of premiums for producing 1s and 2s because packers know where they're getting their value. They understand what they can do with those yield grade 3 cattle. Now, when we get those excess fat cattle over 0.8 of an inch up to an inch, inch 2, and we see them, they exist, that's where you get your heavy discounts. So the discounts outweigh the premiums greatly. So when we talk about quality grading, we talk about what is quality. And this is something I always talk about with my students. That it's the satisfaction the consumer gets from the product. and whatever that product is. And I always use the same example almost every time, and it's really easy to demonstrate in here, because some of us are diehard Coca-Cola, and some of us are diehard Pepsi. Well, I just happen to be diehard Dr. Pepper, and the other two just don't cut it. So for me, quality, even though they're priced virtually the same in the same market, the Dr. Pepper is my quality product. Off-brand isn't going to work, so I'm willing to pay the extra for that quality. In class, I use a lot of times the desks, because the desk fits certain people really well and they don't fit other people. So you have to understand who your customer is. And every single one of us has a customer. So whether it's Gardner and you guys are his customer, or if you guys are providing stocker cattle or to the feedlot or the packer or all the way to the consumer, and then we're all consumers. We all eat products, and we have things we like and we don't like. We have sometimes we go with the name brand, sometimes we go with the off-brand. So obviously price plays a big factor into quality. So when we talk about meat, and as a meat scientist and somebody that coaches the meat judging team at Oklahoma State, I talk about quality a lot, and I'm referring to quality grade. So whether they're prime, choice, select, no roll, dark cutters, commercials, whatever, versus quality. And in meat, when we say quality and quality grade, that's trying to predict palatability and eating satisfaction and tenderness, juiciness, and flavor. But as we know, there can be a lot of other things that go into quality, and oftentimes that's price. Because if you go and you dine at Golden Corral, your expectation is much different than at White Tablecloth Steakhouse. And the price point is much different, and that's what makes the expectation different. My expectation of poultry and pork is much different than of beef, because it's on a different level. And so we discussed that. I served on a committee, it's probably been 15 years ago now, that we were trying to make measurements of what could be considered guaranteed tender beef or pork. And they wanted to set them at the same level, and there were a couple of us that just said, no way. There's no consumer in the United States that would say that the same tenderness level of beef is guaranteed as it is of pork, because we just don't have those expectations. We didn't grow up with them. We expect more from beef products. So what impacts quality? There's a lot of things. A lot of things impact it. The number one thing that probably impacts it is how we cook it, or how the restaurant cooks it. But if it goes from anything else, junk in, junk out. There's only so good I can make something. So we have to think of all the other things that we can do, from genetics to how we feed them, to all the growth technologies that we use, to the management strategies. What happens to them when they get to the slaughter facility? Do we use electrical stimulation? How old are they? And then how much marbling do they have, and what do we do to them after that? So post-mortem aging, very important and very critical to our industry. But so for what you can do, obviously, is management things, select those genetics for higher marbling. And so I want to spend some time talking about marbling and why it's important. There are research papers that exist since the 1920s that talk about marbling and why it matters or why it doesn't. And there are several researchers, they have very different opinions. Some show big differences, some show none. But I think we all agree that it matters. It matters in some regard. And first thing is because it's insurance. It's just like an insurance policy you would buy on cropland in case you get a bad storm. Insurance on whatever you buy. The same thing goes for marbling. And I don't think anyone's ever said that unless they were on some very conscientious health-restricted diet, that marbling was a bad thing. So it contributes to flavor and tenderness, and the whole principle behind the quality grading standards is that the high grades like prime, so you can see from the graph I have less variation in overall eating satisfaction than the lower grades. So there's nothing to say that that all the bad ones are in the lower grades, or that there's no good ones there. It's just less chance of getting one. And I think most of us would like to take less chance of having a bad eating experience than high risk. So a few quotes. So no quality is so highly prized as marbling, and that comes from the Chicago Steak Company. And that's their chefs and what they say and how they view it. The principles behind why marbling matters are because it coats the muscle fiber. So marbling is not in muscle, it's around pieces of muscle fiber. It produces a buttery texture, and it enhances that beefy flavor. So it gives us that flavor that we like and desire. And I have a picture of Dr. Darrell Tatum. He was my mentor and major professor at Colorado State University, a very well-known meat scientist, livestock evaluator, and highly respected by everyone in the industry. Well, he recently did an interview, and he said that the thing that sets beef apart is the wow factor. I've never eaten pork and said wow, or poultry, maybe wow bad, but I've never thought of that. And so when I go and I've never eaten a low quality steak of marbling that I said wow. Everyone I ever said wow, everyone that I have in the top 10 of everyone I've ever eaten had a lot of marbling. Jeff and I, we say our hobby, we don't have a lot of hobbies because we both work a lot, but our hobby is, or I say at least, eating at high-end steakhouses. We really enjoy that. So we really like marbling and we appreciate that. And but if we ever have one that's not a good eating experience, we're really disappointed. So we want to assure that we don't have those. And so this slide is a recent study done at Colorado State to show a positive eating experience. The blue bar is marbling scores that qualify for premium choice, so moderate and modest, those that would be in CAB. And 85% of every steak eaten in that category received a positive eating experience, so 85%. When we drop down to low choice or small marbling, we go down in the 60s. And then when we drop down to select, only 29% of consumers had a positive eating experience. And I think that tells the story, because I had a professor he was across the office from me, and this was when I was in San Angelo, Texas, and he told you could get an A in his class if you knew 3 things. An implant was Ralgro, the Dallas Cowboys were the greatest football team on earth, or professional sports team, and he always told them money drives everything. So I decided that he was wrong about that, at least the implant part, because there's a lot of other implants. I really do like the Dallas Cowboys, but about money, because I think consumers drive everything, because we have to do what consumers want or we won't have any money anyway. So the new norm, and what I think is we need to think about and understand, is if we look at the most recent National Beef Quality Audit, and we've been saying since 1991 when we did the first quality audit and took a snapshot of the industry through a year time period and went around and surveyed packing plants all over the United States, we found in 91 that about 55% of cattle graded choice or better. In 2016, the most recent audit, we're up to 79%. Last month, in March of 2018, USDA shows us that 84% cattle grade choice or better. So we're to a new norm. We've done what the quality audit told us to do. We increased marbling. But just grading choice and low choice is not good enough. That's become a standard that we need to reach above, because if we don't keep moving forward, we're going to stay stagnant, and we know if we're staying stagnant, we're going backwards. So we have to think about those things and think about moving forward, because we've pushed that envelope, so now it's time to move. So maybe the new target is average choice. Maybe it's prime. There's a lot of packers in the industry that'll tell you we have enough prime. Yeah, they think we have enough because they make a lot of money off that prime. And they make more than they probably pay in premiums off that prime, and they like it, and it's high demand, so they can charge for it. So it makes logical sense. And they need somewhere to put their other cattle. But if we produce it and we have it, I think there's value for it. I read a very interesting article that came out in Texas Monthly in February, I think it was February, and it said that some of the very top barbecue places in Texas, in the Austin area and San Antonio, so where they've really perfected that art of briskets, those guys prefer, their chefs prefer prime briskets. And most of us in the meat industry would say a prime brisket is just so fatty, and you're going to have a lot of loss there and a lot of trim loss. They wouldn't want them. But again, it's insurance, and they say that's what they can do with that prime brisket is they can use the fat and the additional marbling and fat that's there to guarantee that it's tender. They are actually selling those at a loss almost to have their customers because they value those prime briskets so much. And that was something I hadn't heard anyone say before, so I thought it was really unique. And we know that it pays. We know that the marbling pays. So this is just a trend of the Choice Select spread, and you guys know this, and you know that we're starting into our peak, and we'll get into summer and we'll peak, and if we go as high as we did last year, that were records in history of over $30 a Choice Select spread, there's a lot of value. But there's such a little amount of fat difference in marbling between Choice and Select. There's also a very little amount between low Choice and average Choice. And so to qualify for those premium Choice programs and certified Angus beef, how do we push that? Why not take that extra step to get to that marbling level to gain that additional $4 to $5 per 100 pounds? So that's something we have to continue to think about. And then carcass weights. We continue to push those, and that's one thing I really do want to spend some time and talk about is why that's an issue and why that causes a problem. So I just sifted some data out of the National Beef Quality Audit because it's not something that we had really looked at. So from the instruments, so instrument grading, we surveyed over 4.5 million head. And of those 4.5 million that were done through 2016, 5% were over 1,050. So the big discount, the big break, $20 to $25, $100. I think it's $23 today. But here's the thing I wanted to know. Of those 1,050, how many are yield grade 4s and 5s? How many are going to get that additional discount? Because I figured it was a lot, because that's one of the problems with them being too big, is they don't have enough muscle to make up for that weight, so to be similar in cutability. So there are those lower cutability scores. 48% of those cattle were yield grade 4s and 5s. So not only did they take the $23 discount per 100 pounds, they took that additional $15 or $25 for being a yield grade 4 or 5. And I think that's where we really get into things and understand that when do we get to that diminishing return of weight? And we have to think about that. And are we really increasing muscle, and that red meat yield that we talk about are important. I just put this sample grid. It's a real simple grid that we use in meat judging. I'm just using it for some examples. I set this one up a couple of weeks ago, so it's at 202 on Choice yield grade 3. It has $18 premium on prime. I think I have a $6 premium on average Choice, and then just some of the standard weight discounts. So I put a few examples together, and obviously you can manipulate these carcasses in any way you want. I can make one be more valuable or another, just move the weight a little bit or move the yield grade, because I mean, when we're killing 25 million steers and heifers, obviously we have a lot of variation. And so, but I think when you look at the premium and you look at a prime and you see that true value at that one's at 219 100 weight, because on the grid I have it on a 900 pound carcass got a $2 discount, so that's why it's 219. even though those might not be completely practical. That's how we do it in meat judging. And then I have a couple of high choice and low choice carcasses, but just to show the difference in hundredweight, but also the difference in total value. And again, you can, so I put the one on the end over there, even though it's a nice average choice carcass. If we get to that 1050, but we're still that yield grade 4 and 5, we're taking some really large discounts. So those things truly add up. And on per individual animal basis, it may not look like a lot, and some of them are very small differences, but when you put it on an entire lot, or 100 head, or 1,000 head, or 50,000 head, you start looking at a lot of different things and a lot of different value. These two lots that I used for examples, I used one with an average weight of 950 and one with an average weight of 980. A nice 15% prime in the first lot and 60% of them at CAB, and shows a little bit more value than the one I have on the other side. They both have some heavies. They both have some yield grade 4s in them, to give an example. And that's really, they only came out to be about $400 difference in total. So then you have to get into the cost of production, on all the economics of management. But I think it still comes back to our last consumer and what they want, and where we get to on that marbling and maturity versus diminishing returns. How long does it take to get to USDA Choice? Or how long does it take to get to Premium Choice CAB? Where do we reach that? When is it economically feasible to continue to feed? Obviously, understanding the markets, which you guys do, and tracking those and watching them every day, and watching the feeder cattle market go down every day lately. And some of those things that make a big change. So, and what growth potential do we have? What do we have for weaning weight, yearling weight? And then marbling deposition versus other fat depots. I was thinking, driving here, of all, I don't know why I was thinking about this, just because I had to think about something when I was driving. All the things I did in grad school. I remember one time I had to go grade 800 head of Santa Gertrudis. It wasn't a good experience. I was in grad school. It was the day after Christmas. And so they were there. I don't know if there was a return. It was probably very negative. Because their marbling didn't match their other fat depots. They didn't deposit marbling. And there's many breeds that don't do that and can only reach a certain potential. We know there's breeds that deposit a lot of marbling. We have the last 2 months, we've slaughtered one of these each month at our meat lab. We've slaughtered they even brought the registration papers to show us, an American Wagyu. It's been both of them have been high prime, yield grade 3s. So I said, I'm going to look at those registration papers. It was 29 months old to get to that point. So is that a diminishing return also? And at what point did it grade prime, and was it big enough? They had over 1,000-pound carcasses. Should we, slaughtered it earlier? So there's all those things you have to think about, and match growth and match marbling with other fat depots, and understand that. And it makes it challenging because, again, marbling and external fat aren't as highly correlated as we'd like them to be. So as we talk about weight and we talk about matching that up, I go back to our National Beef Quality Audit, and every year since 1995, either carcass weight or cut weight or size has shown up as a major issue that we have in our industry. And you notice marbling has showed up several times, as well as satisfaction. And we know that marbling is that insurance. So we know those two things are very important. And we talk about it, and we've changed it. And I think because we've talked about marbling, we've made those changes, but we keep pushing that weight envelope. And we need to push it because we need to produce more pounds, but we have to understand what's the right weight and why that's an issue. And so why being too heavy is a problem is, first, when we get to too large frame size, and we can control that because we can change weight. The way our slaughter floors are designed, for instance, when we get some 1,700-pound Holsteins in there, they're going to be dragging the ground. That's not effective. It's not efficient. We have to cut pieces off, do some different things. We get ribeyes that aren't large enough for their carcass weight, so that impacts the yield grade equation, red meat yield, because it is a factor of muscling. So we get to those yield grade 4s and 5s. They're too heavy for fabrications for some of our employees to handle, to maybe fit through the equipment that's designed in those plants. The real issue comes down when we get to boxes and fitting in the box. We've traditionally put 6 ribeye rolls in a box. We've done it for a long time. When we push carcass weights, if we put 6 ribeye rolls in a box, we have 120-pound boxes, or 100 to 120 pounds. They won't fit. Our box equipment is designed for certain size boxes for sealing, maneuvering, to fit on all the automated pallets. And a lot of the boxes may not have to be handled by employees until they get to at a cutting facility or in a retail outlet for cutting, but that's still way too heavy. I'm not gonna be able to lift a 120-pound box, and I hope that, and we have to understand that. But the biggest thing from a consumer standpoint we have to understand is the problem with them being portion sizing. And Jeff even complained about this the other day, that he was eating somewhere and he got only a ribeye that was only cut about 1/2 inch thick, but it filled up the whole plate. And so we have to think about, how do we change that? How do we maneuver it? When have we gotten too big? We know we're there. We know anytime we get over that 16-inch threshold, that's too big, that we have to make some changes. We've done a lot of things in our industry to try to change that, to come up with new cutting techniques, and that's what I'll talk about a little bit. This slide just shows a lot of the new, what we call value-added cuts and different things that we can do. And some of these don't have a lot to do with portion sizing, they're just to add value. And one thing we've done for about the last 15 years now is with the shoulder clod, we take off especially one muscle because it's really, really easy to get off, the teres major, and we get this nice petite tender. Petite tenders are really good. They rank high on tenderness. And we take it off of almost every shoulder clod that's fabricated. We take them off primes, we take them off selects. It adds a lot of value. It cooks nice as a whole piece. It can be sliced into medallions. We've also, the top blade steak is a little bit more difficult to get off, but we've been taking it off for a long time too, and that's where we get our flat irons. The issue with the flat iron is it requires a little bit more precise cutting, a little bit more trained labor, because you have to fillet it off both sides because it has a big piece of connective tissue running through it, but it just happens to be the second most tender muscle in the body. So you take that big piece of connective tissue out, and the only thing that eats better than it is a tenderloin. So high value, high use. Some issues we have in our industry with it, though, are some people aren't taking the piece of connective tissue out and selling it as a flat iron. And when they put that price tag on it, that can cause some consumer heartburn to get that. The issue we get when we take off the nice flat iron, we're left with the clod, and we've got basically two choices. The heart of the clod, to make an arm roast, to grind it, or then a few places have started trying to cut it and market it as the ranch steak. And that works okay, but that muscle doesn't eat that well unless we get into some of these better genetics, higher marbling, more palatable products. So if we're gonna try to utilize some of these cuts, we need that marbling, or we're going to be selling things like mock tender and eye of round steak, which it doesn't really matter, just aren't that great. We had a big discussion a couple of days ago about why do we keep selling those, and they told me, well, it's price point because people will pay for them. I said, yeah, but they're just not very good. We need to provide them something better. So some of these alternative cuts are good, but we have to think about the labor. But they do add a lot of value from this clod alone. It estimates that it adds $50 to $70 a head. The chuck roll is estimated at a $40 to $50 increase if sold nationally by taking into the 3 pieces, so making the flat iron, the Clod tender, petite tender. So we do add a lot of value from that fabrication. We've recently been working a lot on the chuck roll, because the chuck roll is a big piece. It's difficult to deal with. We traditionally had just used it for roasts. We figured out if we fabricate off the underblade part, which is down on the bottom right, we're left with the chuck eye. Well, the chuck eye happens to be made up of the same muscles as the end of the ribeye. So that when you get the small ribeye muscle and the nice spinalis that tastes really good, and the complexus because it's really high in fat, you can cut steaks out of the chuck eye and they eat very well. So that's been a really good idea. It's just if packers have the market for it and they can do that. There's a few other muscles we can get out of that underblade, and we call those the Sierra cut and the Denver cut, and they haven't become popular yet, but they may as we move and continue, especially maybe on some of our higher grades. A few things we're doing on the ribeye roll because of these 2 large ribeye sizes is we take the cap off and we sell it. We can just cut it in strips, or we can cut it crosswise like a steak and sell it as ribeye cap steaks. Then we have the nice fillet, the center of the ribeye, and we can sell that as ribeye fillets. The disadvantage I see to that is I really like that other muscle. And so I like to have both muscles there because I think they taste very good. The ribeye cap is high in fat. It tastes good, but it is a good marketing scheme and it works well. We've done some similar things with the Striploin to just cut it right down the middle and cut steaks off both sides. A few people have done that for portion sizing. And then one thing that's the sirloin is becoming pretty popular to do this, is to take the bottom muscle off the sirloin and cut it into, so you have center cut sirloin steaks, which are really popular. And the sirloin, that muscle, the gluteus, is a really good muscle. It ranks the highest in beef flavor of all the muscles, and it tastes well. And then to take the bottom muscle off, which is the biceps, and get us culotte steaks. And culotte steaks, if they're cooked properly, maybe enhanced, they're okay. I'm not a huge fan, but I'm very picky. So that has worked some. So some trends that are occurring, and the reason that these cuts and high marbling and high palatability are so important, these guys on the bottom and a lot of other ones, so celebrity chefs and their restaurants, they like these new cuts and these new names and fanciful, but they like quality. They want to advertise at their restaurants that they're serving prime, but they want to serve unique things. So to meet their demands, some of the meal delivery kits like HelloFresh and Blue Apron and Home Chef, they want to have feature beef, but they have to do it at the correct portion size because those are usually 2-people kits. They aren't large portions, and we've got to help get quality in those meal delivery kits to get beef in them. If you go to their websites and you look at those, if anybody's ever tried them, they have a few beef items, but a lot of their items are poultry or seafood. And so we need to get on that trend and keep up with it. We work really well in some of the new diet phases like the keto diet and the paleo diet. And then where will we go with all the changes with Whole Foods and Amazon joining forces and doing all those things? I think we're moving forward. I put a little picture of the Vegas strip steak up there. That's one that some of my colleagues and my graduate student worked on at Oklahoma State, and we did all the tenderness research. And it's a muscle that comes out of the chuck also. It's the subscapularis. It lays right under the blade bone. It eats pretty well. It doesn't look perfect on the plate, so it's usually used in salads or in some kind of stripped type product because it's not as pretty as an appearance as some of the traditional steaks. And that's some of our challenges when we get into some of those other steaks. So as I kind of begin to wrap up, I want to make sure that we understand as a group of producers, meat industry, retailers, that we use all of our tools. And I listed a lot of tools that gardeners take advantage of that we can use, but we want to use everything that we can fit in that toolbox. So all of our knowledge, all the knowledge we can find from other people, everything that you can be provided, and that's hopefully what we continue to do at universities is keep studying things, figuring out new things that can help continue to fill that toolbox and get us to that next level. So that's kind of our goals and hopes and where we get to. So we have to be willing to give that extra effort. And I use this quote, I like this quote, I use it for the judging team. A racehorse that is consistently runs just a second faster, or even 1/100th of a second faster, is worth millions of dollars more. So the same thing goes for quality. Just a little bit more marbling is worth a lot more money. And it provides a lot more eating satisfaction for the consumer. So as we set those goals, I think one thing that Mark and Debbie provided me, a bit about Guard Genetics and U.S. Premium Beef Summary for just the last 10 months. Approximately 98% of choice or better on cattle that they've tracked, over 25% prime. That resulted in over $7 per hundredweight over market value. So the genetics that you have here and are offered here are getting you to that next level. And I think we have to keep moving forward and doing that, because in the end, we still have to remember consumers drive everything, and we want happy consumers. And I really like good steaks too, so I hope you guys keep doing that. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mafi. That's outstanding. I think marbling matters. As I see a lot of my K-State and Oklahoma State friends, and the Oklahoma Staters should be very proud of Dr. Mafi, as we all are in the beef industry, but oftentimes they give me a hard time about what color this barn is. And I say, but if we lived 6 miles further south, do you think orange would have worked? Or so, I don't know. I'll ask the first question, and I've got 3 interns that are going to have some good questions here in just a bit. But do you think that the uptick that we've seen in demand the past few years, changing the quality of beef, what do you think that's done to demand just across the U.S. and the world?
So I think that change in quality has been very important. I think as we have especially moved with some of our global markets to be opening, and with tariffs right now, who knows. But I think one thing I always tell people when I talk, just the first day I talk about quality grading, and I say that USDA Choice means something around the world. That means something when you go to Japan. That resonates with their consumers, and it means something in the U.S. We could walk across campus at Oklahoma State, and there would be very few people that knows how you get to choice or even what that is. But if you say choice or prime, they know that is better. They know that means something. So I think that's really helped demand. I think as we evolve and change and get higher, and I think we're drawing some customers back that we had lost to poultry. And I think that's what the trends show. We're trending up in the beef industry, and I think that's a major factor.
Do you think we'll ever hit a point in the industry where we're too much prime, or to a point where prime is the norm and we'll be stopped there?
I don't think we will ever get there, and I didn't really mention it much, but I think we might separate the quality grades back. I think we might move to a new prime, a higher prime, because the quality grades were developed in the 20s, and they've had about 12 changes since the 20s, and one of those was in 1950, and they combined what was then prime and choice together and made prime and created the new choice grade, shifted some things. So I think at some point we may shift to that, but I think if we do, we may take and make a new higher quality. I don't think we'll go back. I hope we don't go back. I hope we don't do what pork did in the late 90s and go to ultra lean stress. That we don't need to go that way.
They're trying to put some marbling back into pork now because of that?
They're trying very hard, but they're mostly getting external fat. So it's hard to go back.
what do you see as the most limiting factor for cattle hitting that prime mark? Whether it be genetics or feeding or?
Without a doubt, genetics.
Other questions? Brian Bertelson, are you in the room? I know he's here somewhere, but we had our U.S. Premium Beef annual meeting recently, and he gave a similar talk, and we put up all the information, and the quote that we thought was so profound, he said, more marbling is more better. And so I think that's important, and all my kids, I think they went dilly-dilly, so I still don't know what that means.
I didn't either until last fall when
still
the
don't.
judging team had to explain it to me.
This probably just happened that way, but I noticed on the chart where you were showing the different grades and the values. As the marbling went up, you had the ribeyes. No, as the marbling went down, you had the ribeyes going up. That's not a trend, is it? Is that just, it just happened that way?
It just happened that way in
Okay.
what I put up there.
Yeah.
How much effect do you think that preparation has on tenderness and taste?
So cooking preparation, a lot. So low heat, moist cookery can overcome not having marbling or having tough cuts. Obviously, seasoning, marinades can have a tremendous impact. So we can make things better by cooking, and I think that for those of you that are really good cooks know you can do that. But I think that we have to ensure that we're not all good cooks and we want that insurance, but we also want to be able to just grill a steak and have that natural beef flavor and beef tenderness that we talk about as our expectations are.
With last year, they had peak spread between Choice Select, but yet we're at an all-time high with the cattle grading 84% Choice. Why was that spread from Choice Select so high this last year?
So there's a lot of reasons that go into that, and I'm not an economist, so I won't be very good at answering all those reasons. They're demand. So we have demand. We have global market demand for those choice products. I think we, as we move forward and we see that, we know that always goes up in summer, and when we have fewer choice cattle sometimes. So I think there's a lot of factors, but I think demand is the main factor that pushes that spread, but it's always a cycle. You can see historically it's always come down in March. There's a lot of one part of it that it's hard to quantify and understand too is people will stockpile back. And there's fewer in the market, there's not as many for them to buy, so that changes the spread. But then when there's more in the market, they will buy a lot up and keep them in storage facilities. There's some will freeze, some will just hold for long aging, so out in vacuum package at 90 days. Some will, so there's a few companies experimenting with, we've done some research recently on some what we call crust freezing, and so it's just freezing the outside, it's holding it right under 28 where meat freezes at, to try to push that out to 180 days so they can take advantage of when that spread's small, but then when we're in short supply we have to re-up that spread. So there's all kinds of things.
But I think if you just look at the demand factors that have been there, you said you weren't an economist, but a lot of those economists were predicting the prices through all these things, and we look and we work through all these cattle, and even though this week was a little bit rougher and such, in general, those prices and pulling all those cattle forward has been because of demand. And really, if you think about beef demand, if they're going to buy chicken and pork, you're going to put the right sauces on there and such, and that's what you expect. But when they buy beef, they want it to be good, and marbling is what differentiates that. And that being said, you think about certified Angus beef and what all you folks have done with the breeding that you've done with your cattle. They sold 1,121 million pounds last year. That was an all-time record. And they're 10%, 15% above that. And so you look at the genetics and what's been done in the past, and just a short 15 years ago, certified Angus beef had a 15% acceptance rate. And last week it was 35%. So the point ends up being marbling matters, and marbling matters because that's the taste that beef brings.